Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Chof Beis Amud Beis, the second line from the top. Our Mishnah taught us that in order to determine which kohen performs the avodah of Trumas Hadeshen, initially it was the one who came early to do so. If there was many people, many kohanim that came together, then they would make a ritzah, a foot race. That means that whoever would run up the kevesh, which was 32 amos long, and reach within 4 amos of the Mizbeach, he was the winner, and he performed the avodah of Trumas Hadeshen. Subsequently, they determined that it was dangerous, and therefore they required a pious to determine who is the kohen to perform the avodah. The Gemara now brings the following brisa: Tana hotziu etz ba'oseichem leminyan. The brisa says that the one who is memuna, who was in charge, he would declare, stick out your finger in order to then be counted. They would make the kohanim stand in a circle and put out their finger to be counted. Ask the Gemara, why don't we just count they themselves? Why are we counting fingers? Answers the Gemara, Messiah le Rabbi Yitzchok, to support for Rabbi Yitzchok. The Omar Rabbi Yitzchok also limnois es Yisrael afilu dvar mitzvah. It's prohibited to count Jews even for a mitzvah purpose. The Chsiv, it says in the Pasuk, Vayifkedem bebozek. They were counted by using broken shards of ceramic. They were taking broken shards, each one they would then put it in the middle, and those ceramic shards were counted to determine how many people. Now, we could not bring a proof from the Torah in Parshas Kisisa that says we give machzis shekel to be counted as opposed to be making a head count, because there was just a census, but not necessarily for a mitzvah purpose. Here it's a mitzvah purpose, we're saying. And still, we have a source that cannot be done directly. Maski flo Rav Ashi asked, Bimai dahai bozek lishna de mivzak hu. He challenges, who says that here is referring to broken shards? Vidilma shma de matahu. Maybe it's the name of a city. It says that they found Adoini of Bezek. So we see that Bezek is the name of a place. Rather, let's bring a proof from here that you cannot count even for a mitzvah purpose. You can't count a fellow Jew. Vayishama Shaul es ha'am. And Shaul summoned the people. Vayifkedem betloim. And he counted them with tloim. He had them take a tle from the king's tle, the royal tloim, and each one would take the tle and then allowed to go inside of a bigger area, and then he would count the tloim and determine how many Jews there were that were volunteering to be in the army. Rabbi Elazar says, when a person counts Jews, not only is it prohibited, but he's over alav. It says that the amount, the counting of the Jewish people were like the chol hayam asher lo yomed, that should not be measured. So here we have a lav. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar oiver b'shnei lavin. There's 2 lavin because the pasuk goes on to say, it says lo yisofer v'lo yomed. It says both things. Sorry, lo yimod v'lo yisofer, both things. Shneimar lo yomed. Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, Rabbi Yonasan Rami, he brings the following contradiction. It said in the pasuk, "V'hoya mispar b'nei Yisrael kechol hayam." It first says that the count of the Jewish people were like the sand of the sea. V'ksiv asher lo yoimad v'lo yisofer. And then it goes on to say that it cannot be measured and it cannot be counted. So here we have a contradiction. It either is counted like the sand, or it's not counted. Lo kasha kam bizman sheyosel oisin ritzoin shel makom, kam bizman she'ein oisin ritzoin shel makom. When Klal Yisrael was doing ratzon shel makom, then they can't even be counted. But if they're not doing ratzon shel makom, then they can be counted like the chol. Rabbi Omer mishum Abba Yosi ben Dostoi lo kasha. A different way explaining this apparent contradiction. Kan bidei Adam, kan bidei Shamayim. Bidei Adam, man cannot count. Bidei Shamayim can count. Omrav Nihiloi bar Idi Amar Shmuel. Kivan shenisnamne Shinismane Odom Parnas Alatzibur Misasher. The time that a person is appointed to be the one who's going to be the head, the Parnas of the Tzibur, that person will be Misasher, he will become wealthy. In other words, he won't need to be bribed or anything because of his merit of being now a loyal Parnas, who is somebody responsible and is upright. Mikor Ksiv, it says, Vayifkedem bebozek, U'v'sof Ksiv Vayifkedem betloim. By Shaul HaMelech it says, he counted them with, what we said, bozek, with shards. And now it said, afterwards, he counted them with tloim. So you see that he had enough flock in his, enough sheep in his flock that he's able to then count tloim. So it went up from shards to merely tloim as a result of him being mismane ala tzibur, dahainu, to be a parnas ala tzibur, to be the king. V'dilma medidhu, asked the Gemara, but perhaps it is not his own, it's from them. Imkei my rebusa demilsa vayare benachal. So why would it then mention in the pasuk vayavo shol ad ir amalek vayare benachal? Why mention that? I'm sorry. Imkei my rebusa demilsa. What would be the chiddush of that if indeed it wasn't coming to teach us this chiddush that it went from shards, counting for the shards, to counting with tloim? Elamai must we teach you this yisoid, that one who's mismaneh ala tzibur as a parnas, as a leader, as Shaul was, he becomes nisasher, becomes wealthy. Now the pasuk Gemara brings the pasuk vayarev benachal. The entire pasuk reads vayavo Shaul ad ir Amalek vayarev benachal. Shaul came to then wage war against Amalek. It says vayarev benachal. What is this reference to the Nachal? Amar Mani al Iske Nachal. He was waging war, so to speak, with Hashem in regards to the Nachal. Explains the Gemara, B'Shoah Shomar Lakish Baruch Hu L'Shol. At the time that Hakadosh Baruch Hu commanded Shaul, Lech v'hikisa es Amalek, go and smite Amalek. Omar Shaul said, Uma nefesh achas amra toiro habo have egla arufa. By one who is found dead, the procedure is, if we don't know where we find him in the middle of between two cities, we go ahead and measure the closest city, and then we take the ziknei ha'ir of that city, and we have a procedure of the egla arufa. So if that's true when it comes to finding one dead body, kol nefashos halolu al achas kama v'kama, all of these nefashos also, how much more so? They'll need a kapara. Vim Adam chata behema my chata. If man sins, what did the animals deserve to be killed? What sin did they do? Vim gedolim chatu kitani mechatu. And if the elders, the ones who are of age, sinned, what did the kitanim do that they sinned, that they should be held accountable to be killed? Yata baskol v'amar loi. A baskol went out and said to Shaul, Alti hi tzadik harbe. Don't be overly righteous. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells you to kill out Amalek, men, women, and children, including the animals, that is the command. And the time that Shaul says to Doeg HaAdomi, Soiv ato ufega b'kohanim, go around and smite, kill out the kohanim. It's talking about ear noiv, the ear shel kohanim. Yotza baskav amrloi al tirsha harbe. Don't be wicked beyond necessary. In other words, this was something that was a wicked act. Shaul HaMelech, he accepted lashon hara that Doeg had told him that the ear kohanim of Noiv saved David HaMelech, who was told that David was a enemy of Shaul, and nonetheless they gave him arms and they gave him food. Rav Huna said, Kama lechali v'loi margish gavro de more saye. He says, how much a person will not be sick and not have worries when he has his master, referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as the one who is helping him. Shol ba'achas va'osolei. And we show this by saying Shaul, he sinned with one, and it was something that they then held him accountable for. David b'shtayim v'lo also loy. David sinned with 2 sins, and he was not held accountable. Gemara explains, Shaul ba'achas mahi. What was this sin that Shaul did that he was held accountable? Maaseh the Agag. The Maaseh of Agag that was mentioned just before. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him to kill out all of Amalek, not sparing one, and he left overnight King Agag. Although he was planning to kill him, but he left him overnight, and that night he had a child, which was then the Hemshech of Amalek. Asked the Gemara, but he did something else, and what we mentioned before. He killed out Noiv Ir HaKohanim. So it's not just one sin that he did that he was reckoned with. Answers the Gemara, Amaised the Agag Ksiv, that it was the mice of Agag that was written that he lost his kingship. Nechamti ki amlachti es Shaul lamelech. Hashem says, Kivyocha, I regret that I made Shaul the king. David b'shtayim mainhu. What are these 2 sins that David HaMelech did that he was not held accountable? At least it wasn't considered to be then the also loy. The Uriah v'dahasosa. One was in regards to Uriah Hachiti, he sent to the front lines in order to be killed. And the second was the incitement that HaKadosh Baruch Hu caused him, and he was then incited to the point where he then made a census. Explains the Gemara, there was also an additional sin that David HaMelech did that he should have then be considered be that you're saying he was not reckoned with, but he did something else also. It was the second sin of Bathsheba. Gemara says, Hasam iporu mine. There he was punished. The Chsiv says in the Pasuk, Ve'ez hakivso yishalim arbatayim. The kivso, here it's referring to Bathsheba. He will be paid 4-fold. Yeled, Amnon, Tamar, Ba'avshalom. His 4 children, Yeled, the first one was with Bathsheba, and that child died. Amnon was killed. Tamar was raped by Amnon, and Avshalom was killed. Gemara asks, Hasam nami ipor mine, but there also he was punished. In other words, for indeed making the census that Hashem incited him with. The Chsiv says, Vayitein Hashem dever ba'am min haboker v'ad eis moyed. HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought a dever amongst the people. That killed out 70,000 Jews. So you see that he was punished. Answers the Gemara, Hasam in regards to the counting, he wasn't punished physically on his own self. Certainly he was emotionally disturbed, and was a terrible tragedy that Klal Yisrael had so many that fell as a result of his counting. But he himself physically was not punished. Hasam, but over there in Gabi Bathsheba, Nami lo yipar megufe, asked the Gemara. He also wasn't punished with his goof. It was his children that died, or it was that his daughter Tamar was raped. Gemara says, Loi ipar megufe. Indeed, he was punished with his own physical body. The Omar Rav Yehuda Marav, for Rav said, Shisha chadashim nitztara David. For 6 months, David HaMelech had saras. Upirshu heimenu Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin, they went away from him. V'nistalke heimenu Shechina, and the Shechina departed from David HaMelech. The Siva says in Posuk, Yashuvu li yire'echa. David HaMelech says, please come back to me, those who fear you, referring to the Sanhedrin. V'yoidei dosecha, and those who know your edus, referring to the Sanhedrin. V'ksiv, because they separated from him. V'ksiv says, Hashivi li sosa nishacha, return to me joy for your salvation, meaning that the Shechina had departed from him. I want joy back so I can get the Shechina. V'homa Rav, and Rav said, Kibel David Lashon Hara. Rav said, behold, David accepted Lashon Hara, and therefore this should be another thing that we should say. He should be also loy. And it doesn't say this that was loy also loy. It only says one sin that he was loy also loy. So why does it mention? 2 sins that he was loy also loy. The one with it mentions that he sinned Aleph with Uriah Hachiti, and the other one with the Hasasa, with making the census. Why does it mention Lashon Hara as a third sin? V'loy also loy. Kishmuel, like Shmuel says, the Omar loy kibel David lashon hara. He did not mekabel lashon hara. It wasn't a sin. Well, Rav Nami, the Omar kibel David lashon hara ha'ipur mine. And even according to Rav, who says that David Melech accepted lashon hara, he also was punished. How? Says the Gemara. The Omar Rav Yehuda Marav b'shosh Omar loy David mipi boishes. Omarti ata v'tziva techalku es hasada. That you and Tziva, the two of you, shall split the Sadeh. Yotza Baskol v'amroloi. A Baskol emanated and said to David HaMelech, Rechavim v'yovam yechalku es hamalchus. That means to say that he would lose half of his malchus, because only one of his sons will get half of it, the other one will go to Yerovam. And therefore, between these two will be the malchus. He'll lose half the malchus. So that was considered to be a punishment to David HaMelech directly to his goof. The Gemara now brings a pasuk in regards to Shaul HaMelech, Ben Shona Shaul b'Malkoi. The normal reading of this verse is that Shaul in his first year of his malchus, but the Pashit literal translation is he was 1 year old in his malchus. Omer Rav Huna to explain ki ben shona shalotoam tam chet. He was like 1 year old who did not sin. He didn't have a taste of sin. That means before anything that happened, before becoming king, he never sinned. Maski Rav Nachem bar Yitzchok ve'ema ki ben shona shemiluchlach betit uvetzoya. Maybe he's compared to a 1 year old who was dirtied, who's soiled with excrement. They showed a fearful, dreaded malach in a dream to him, showing him that what he said was unacceptable. Omar, he said, Shaul ben Kish. He said, I spoke too much to you, about you, Shaul, the bones of Shaul ben Kish. Further, they showed the same fearful type of image in his dream. Omar, he said, Shaul ben Kish Melech Yisrael. This time he added Melech Yisrael. I spoke too much against you to the bones of Shaul Melech Yisrael. They explain what is the reason for the bones. Why not to Shaul HaMelech himself? So the Maharsha explains because the bones are something that's normally decayed as a result of kina. And therefore any suspicion of Shaul HaMelech as having kina would have made him then not having bones. Here expresses that he has bones, that he wasn't wrong for having any suspicion of Shaul HaMelech in having kina, having improper jealousy towards anybody else. Omer Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, Mibnei ma no nimshecha malchus Shaul. So Shaul lost his malchus, like we learned before, because he didn't kill Agag. But why didn't then his malchus go on to somebody else from his descendants? Why did his kingship stop after his 2 years of reign? Answers the Gemara, boy shum doifi. He didn't have any doifi, he didn't have anything that was wrong with his lineage. What's wrong with that? The Omar Rabbi Yochanan mishum b'shim ben Yehoitzodok ein ma bindim parnas al hatzibur. We don't put a leader onto the tzibur elim ken kupa shel shrotzim tluyim loy ba'achorov, unless he has some sort of taint in his lineage. If his lineage is not tainted at least a little bit, then there's a problem. Why? Because if he gets too haughty, we will say, turn around, meaning look back at your lineage. Look back at your lineage, there's some sort of taint that you shouldn't be so arrogant about. David HaMelech had that tainted lineage as well, because he came from Rus, the Moabit, and therefore that was a kupa shel shrotzim, so to speak, that he shouldn't become arrogant and haughty.